This is a question that I've been turning over in my mind a lot, and Dina, I don't know if you have as well. This this time is one of those where I get to sit in my office and make up stories. I feel so incredibly lucky and privileged, and I feel like I should, maybe I should quit my job and become like an immigration lawyer or something that feels like it would be more practical. And then I realized that I don't have the skills to do that. But what I do hope, and what I keep coming down to, is that I'm turning to the arts myself to sort of remember what it is that matters, what it is that I want to see in the world. I'm turning to poetry and to other people's fiction and to music, to try and hold on to the things and go, yeah, that's what matters. That's sort of what we're working towards. Those are the things that can create meaning in life. And maybe it's just enabling, but that's sort of what I'm telling myself, that that's what art is for, and that has a value too. I don't know, where are you, Dina, with everything that's going on in your work?
I feel very much the same way. Also, the exact doubts that you're talking about. But before I say anything, I have to say I need to finish that story. I don't know what to like.
I'll
The
email it
AQR
to
that's in.
you.
Yes,
We'll be in
please.
touch.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, I had that exact thought, around 2015, 2016, when everything was becoming so dire for refugees, and just remembering what it had been. Thought I wasted talent or opportunity I was given. I should have been an immigration lawyer. Exactly that. But I think the thing that put that thought to rest was going to the refugee camps and seeing how important it is for the stories to get out and to be told in these singular ways that we've been taught, to tell them just, through our as there's prose writers. It is a very important thing, because one of the biggest tactics that the other side has, the anti-immigration, let's close the gates people, is to make everyone into one faceless horde with one terrible story and an unappealing one, right? Where the reality is that these are people with individual, harrowing, singular stories, and one thing I discussed, that themselves don't know to tell it, so that it's moving to Western audience. And the Western audience seems to be all that matters now. Immigration officers are trained to listen to stories in the Western way. People, native born Western people are taught to listen to stories in the way that to listen to stories. And so what we have is this, lived experience as Eastern people, but training in Western stories. And that these things life and make them individual and make people see. And at the end of the day, it's a long, slow, grueling, and a very aggregate sort of process that will probably have impact over many decades, but it will. And that's what I tell myself.
I love what you said there about sort of the ways that in fact a storyteller can sort of almost be an interpreter between different modes of thinking, between East and West, or between people who have this kind of experience and who have not. I think it's such a wonderful way of looking at it. And one of the things that I think that writers can do, prose writers of all kind, poets, anything, is to get people to sort of slow down and, like you said, look at individuals, and sort of see individual stories rather than sort of the general. As a fiction writer, I always think of the fiction writer's job as making the reader ask questions, not necessarily giving answers, but sort of like making them wonder, what would that be like? I think that writing is really wonderful because in some ways it's one of the few forms where you can really make someone hear someone else's thoughts, or feel what they're feeling in some ways. It can allow people, I think, to have access to something that, like you said, otherwise they might not pay any attention to, or they might paint with one very wide brush and say, oh, I know that story, and those are just bad people, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I feel like writing in particular can do, is to kind of, like you said, disaggregate that and make people look at the specifics. Are you? No, go ahead.
I was going to say, how many different ways there are art story. There really, truly are. You have one that happens and it can be made into 50 different works of art,
Yeah.
And so that choice is really, it's important how shown to the world. There was this, I have to tell you this anecdote. There was this immigration lawyer who I talked to in the Netherlands whose clients were mostly Iranian. And he told me, like, it takes so much work to tell stories to asylum officers. And one of the reasons, because he said, you ask an Iranian to tell, and they don't start at the beginning of the story, and they don't even start at the moment of their own birth. They start at the beginning of the universe. That's how Iranians tell stories. And he's like, how do you program people to tell their stories so they don't sound like they're lying? But I think it's become kind of second nature, the way we tell stories. And I think we sometimes lose sight of the fact that has taken skill and training, and it has value. But
it does, absolutely. I feel like that could be true of the Chinese as well, that the past is always sort of there running alongside the present. And I realize that it influences my fiction. But like you said, to be able to kind of mediate between those worlds, I think has a real value, not just in terms of, communication, but really in terms of just making people feel like we are part of a larger community, and thinking about sort of like the larger context of that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
I'm curious, Dina, to know, are you writing now, or are you reading? Like, what are you working on, and what form is work taking for you right now?
Well, right now, what, pandemic has been such a, I honestly, as a writer, I'm sure, I don't know if you thought of this too, but at the beginning I thought, well, lockdown, this won't affect me or my work so much because it's so at a desk and, solitary. But in fact, it took me down different avenues just simply because I was so full of uncertainty and fear. And there were certain things that just kind of stopped. Like I was no longer, and also I wasn't able to go out there and collect stories from other people in the same way that I used to. So different forms just to let out some steam. I wrote a play, my first play. I tried writing a screenplay and have absolutely new for that because I thought it would be easy. It was not easy. It was, and I kind of had to shift a little bit also of what sort of things I write about from my own life, the fiction nonfiction balance, just because there's just different things that are pulling at during a lot of it. But I'm working on a book and it's called Who Gets Believed, and it will come out in about 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years, who knows. But it goes beyond the whole refugee situation, as my last book was, to the issue of stories and credibility and whose stories matter in this world, and that is really important to me. Really also very important for me to try to help people understand how the thing that happens to refugees is not just like in its own little bubble. It affects the way we look at the vulnerable in many situations, and it kind of bleeds up from there for you.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. And that's such a big, and I think such an important issue, that idea of like sort of who gets the benefit of the doubt, who gets the quote unquote airtime to get to tell their stories in the first place, whose stories get picked apart and whose stories just get believed right at face value. And it cuts across so many lines. That's fascinating. I can't wait to read that.
But are you going to give us another fabulous novel?
I'm working on it. I think like you, I found that the pandemic at the beginning, all of my writer friends and I were like, well, we have been training for this. We are used to staying at home, staying in our offices, not seeing other people. They're like, we've got all of the skills to survive the lockdown, right? Going without social interaction. We don't get bored. We'll be set. And then like you, I suddenly realized that, the outside world, that membrane between you and the outside world is porous for a reason. I was finding that I just needed, I guess, sort of novelty. I needed to feel like I was part of the world in order to be writing about it. And so it's been a little bit of a struggle for me, as I think it has been for you and everybody. But I'm trying to get back to the page because I realized that all of the sort of anxieties that I was feeling, that everyone in the world was feeling and sharing about what is happening and where are we going to go from this, and what kind of world are we going to try and make on the other side of this? How are we going to get there? And then what are we going to try and do? the way that I make sense of all that is through writing. And so for me, I had to get back to the page in order to process that. And I'm figuring out what to do. But I'm finding that the stories that I'm writing are sort of dealing really, really directly with like larger issues about, you know, who belongs or who gets to be there. You know, something like what you were saying, which is probably why I was so excited about the topic of the book. You know, whose stories get believed and who's seen as credible versus who's not seen as credible. You know, all those sorts of things.
I can't read it.
Well, we'll do exchange notes. But I feel like these are issues. These are big issues that we as a society, and I mean like the whole world, not just even Americans, but everybody, we're grappling with these. And I guess maybe the role of artists and writers in this is to try and help us sort through what we think and to get us to sort of consider aspects of those questions that we hadn't before. So I'm very, very slowly working on a novel. I was supposed to go to Europe to do research like right now, which is obviously not happening. And so instead I'm trying to do reading, and I'm trying to sort of imagine my way through some of what I'm writing about. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, that's exciting. You know, I think that we are all going to get a lot more creative how we get our, because, you know, you're right, you can't go and experience it in the same way anymore. But, you know, if there's anything about writers, is that the nation will fill in all of
exactly
those. Yeah, you know, I have to tell you, Celeste, this is kind of a fun little tidbit about, because as you were talking about this, I remembered how there is just so much overlap in themes of the sort of things that we write about. And it reminded me of the time I actually came across your work. I was pregnant and at the Book Foundation Fellowship, you know, and someone had left your novel in my room, you know, and I started to read it, and, you know, and I was so frustrated because I wasn't able to write because of the pregnant brain, you know, and you know, and I was kind of by myself there. My partner wasn't, but I started to read it, and I started to kind of skip out of dinner early so I could read more and more and more. And, you know, and I finished it, and it was one of the things that helped me kind of boost again, because the experience of, you know, this girl in your novel was so familiar, you know, just being an outsider in middle America, which is exactly what happened to me. So, you know, it was just this moment of being able to, and then 2 months later, we were both in the same class for the National Endowment for the Arts. So I said,
that's right.
Okay, Celeste Ng, that's right. So then I said, she's on my list forever.
Well, and likewise, I've been a fan of yours for a long time. So that just makes me so happy. I'm so glad to hear that. And this is a nice thing, I think, also about writing, is that like you don't know who you're reaching, and yet other people are reaching you. And then at a certain point you find out, you're like, oh, we're actually friends, even though we've never actually met each other. We're friends through our work. And that's kind of wonderful. So, well,
and I think that there is something, like, I think one of us, I think probably you, write a novel these Ivy League colleges and being someone from another country, from another class, you know, I wish for a novel about, you know, poverty in the Ivy League and all of that stuff. So if we had like 3 hours right now, that's one thing I want to talk to you about, you know, is this space in America and how they still really do exist. They just separate into these little,
absolutely,
you know,
I feel like this could be our pandemic writing project. We could just like kind of get together and like jointly write the novel together. This book that I totally agree needs to come out. I was actually just talking with a friend about this morning, the sort of weird experience of being at sort of like an Ivy League college and yet not coming from the sort of background that many people come from. And what I said to my husband was, I feel like I learned a lot. I'm not sure those were the things that the university intended to teach me. But yes. I was like, I feel like that was a really different kind of education, and one that, you know, I'm still mulling over at this point. So we can. What did
you feel like? I mean, I would love to know your experience of that. You know, I mean, you know, not being.
Yeah, I mean, I came from like a pretty like solid upper middle class family. Like we had enough money. We were never worried about being hungry. Like I was really fortunate in that way. But like, my parents were the first in their families ever to go to college. They were immigrants. You know, I did not have, we did not have staff at my parents' house, right? Things like that, weird experiences where I was like, oh, a lot of people here have had a very, very different life than I have. And you see the world in really different ways. And the things that to me seem obvious and self-evident and maybe important are completely different from the things that many other people saw. And it took me a really long time to kind of feel like I could find steady ground on which to kind of place my feet. And until I found the friends that I felt like I actually had connections with, and a lot of them tend to be people who came from a similar background. And so, yeah, this is something that I feel like we need to have a whole separate Zoom call to chat about.
Exactly.
It's such a rich, fascinating thing. And it, I don't know, it speaks to so many things I feel like that are cutting across our world today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just saw so many echoes of this, like my college, so many echoes of it in your work. I just wanted to ask, but yeah, I hear you. Absolutely.
And it's a weird experience too of having to explain where you come from and like why you think the way that you are thinking, right? And to feel all the time like you're like, I don't belong here, which you already feel. I think if you are, you know, one of the first in your family to go to university, there's always that feeling of imposter syndrome. And when you add on to that, you know, being a child of immigrants or being of a different race or culture, being all these different things, it becomes a very complicated kind of soup.
Yeah, well, it's all exactly, and it was so surprising to me, and it continues to be surprising to this day, how many practices are, you know, still kept in place that just like give a little bit of a leg up to have parents, you know, the free internships and a million other things that basically exclude people without resources or without certain kinds of connections, people who haven't been raised in, you know.
How much of it comes from, how much of it comes from, oh, well, I know my coworker at the law firm knows somebody, let me call him and just see if he knows anyone. And the way that kind of trickles down, there's so much of that.
I am loving this conversation with you two. And it reminds me, well, I have a little quote on my desk that kind of, this may spur you to go and to do this project together. It's from Louise Glick, you know, and she says that writing is a kind of revenge against circumstance too. Bad luck, loss, pain. If you make something out of it, then you've no longer been bested by these events. And I think, you know, both of you have done that. And it sounds like even this time, maybe that's the call to arms. You know, if we can make something out of it, then we're not bested by it.
But, I love that.
That's such a quote. I love it. It's so true. I mean, it reminds me of, I've had moments of absolution where my defense mechanism in the moment was like, it's okay, I'll write about it. It's okay. It's good that I have.
It is such a good tool to have in times that are difficult, because you can be like, okay, I'm going to take notes on this and I'm going to use it somehow, right? Like this kind of suffering or this kind of agony or this kind of discomfort is not going to be wasted. I'm going to do something with it. And I love that idea of turning it around into something that now you have bested that situation.
Well, exactly. Do you know, I did that while I was getting a C-section in a public hospital in London, and I gave that story to Ron.
And that's what you do, right? Like you go through this, and then in some ways you're like, I'm going to spin gold out of this, you know, this straw that I've been given in some way. So great.
Exactly. It's a, like, actually, it's a tool that we have psychologically, I think, really nice. I kind of work my way out of the most devastating situations in minutes. One day I'll be with.
It is. I always wonder what people who are not writers or creative people do with those feelings. Like for us, I feel like we can kind of go, okay, we're going to save that for something. We're going to do something with that story. And if you didn't have anywhere to put it, you would, I don't know what they do. It's a place where I feel really lucky. Denial.
Yeah, denial. Exactly.